Watching the first episode of Hannibal, you would be forgiven for thinking that you're just watching a garden variety police procedural. After all, for the first 20 minutes or so, that's really all the episode is. We get a brief glimpse at Will Graham and what he can do. Then Jack Crawford comes in with a case. Will starts helping on the case. We meet the rest of the team. Jack gets frustrated that the investigation is not getting anywhere, and so on and so forth. For a premiere episode, Aperitif. Just a quick side note that these episode names are going to be difficult to pronounce, so do not judge me in the comments. Aperitif does not do anything too extraordinary in its first act or for the first half of its second. However, there is something that should give you a lot of hope for the show going forward. It is the back half of the episode. The episode opens on Will Graham using his empathy to piece together what a killer did at a crime scene. The way Bryan Fuller and company show this makes it look almost like a superpower, which for all intents and purposes it kind of is. Then we cut to Will in a classroom, which is quickly entered by the guru himself, Jack Crawford. We will dive more into this scene later, but at the surface level, it is just Jack enlisting Will's help in solving a murder case. That is when we are introduced to the case. A Willy Wonka killer,
The snozberries taste like snozberries,
who is abducting girls who are all very similar. Will surmises that all these girls are similar to the one true intended victim that he means to kill.
Every girl he takes is a candy bar, and hidden in amongst all of those candy bars is the one true intended victim, which, if we follow through in our metaphor, is your golden ticket.
Quick side note about this scene is that the writing elevates it. There is nothing here that the audience probably has not seen in another police procedural. It is two characters talking in front of an evidence board about the victims and wondering about who the killer might be. The writing, however, is elevated by the way Will sees it. Comparing these girls to candy bars and bringing up Willy Wonka, it is such an odd way to look at this case, which is a great example of how Will sees these cases, and why Jack wanted his help. We then cut to the house. They talk to the family for a bit, and then Will discovers the victim has been brought back home and tucked into bed. Will uses his empathy again, only to be interrupted by Beverly Katz.
I was looking for velvet in the other wounds, but I was interrupted.
Hold on, excuse me.
Were you though, Beverly? From what we already know about Will's power, he was probably standing there when you entered the crime scene. Did you walk past Will and start doing your job to then start talking to Will? Or did Will happen to walk into the room from the balcony, I guess? Never mind, I got sidetracked. Where were we? Will is returning home, where he finds Winston on the road. This scene is so important because it lets us start to empathize with Will. Before this, he has been kind of odd and standoffish, but here he picks up a stray, takes him home, bathes him, dries him off, and introduces Winston to the rest of his dogs. It is such a sweet scene, and I just love the hell out of it. Then we are introduced to the first piece of nightmare imagery that plagues Will for the rest of the show. The backbone of so much of Hannibal is these strange images. They are always visually arresting, but also give a great glimpse into Will's psyche as the show proceeds. We will discuss nightmare imagery more down the line. Now we are at the scene previously mentioned where Jack is frustrated on the lack of leads, but it also shows a glimpse of this show's humor.
What are you doing in here?
I enjoy the smell of urinal cake.
Me too, we need to talk. Use the ladies' room!
Also, doesn't this bathroom look a lot like the bathroom in The Shining? Is that just me? Jack meets with Alana Bloom, who is in a lot of ways throughout this series Will's protector. The person who is always thinking about Will when no other character, even Will, is not. We also get a glimpse that Jack knows that he is putting Will into a position that is not necessarily safe for him.
Alana, I wouldn't put him out there if I didn't think I could cover him. All right, if I didn't think I could cover him 80%.
More on this later. Will makes a breakthrough in the case when he realizes that the killer has been eating the victims, and finally, we are introduced to Hannibal Lecter. We are 22 minutes into the episode, the halfway point in the pilot, and we are just now seeing Hannibal for the first time. How ballsy is that? A lesser writing team would have probably started the show with Hannibal and trickled Will and the police in throughout the episode. But no, Bryan Fuller makes the audience wait to meet Hannibal the cannibal. And it works. Our first real intro to Hannibal is him being a therapist. Not him murdering someone, but him just doing his job. Also, the little glimpse Mads Mikkelsen gives when Franklin drops the tissue on the side table is amazing. Just a small look shows how incredibly rude Hannibal found that. Jack shows up and is burying the lead onto why he is there, which leads Hannibal to suspect that Jack is there investigating him. There is such menace here. Hannibal assuring Jack that they are alone. Hannibal just holding a scalpel. And also, what is that painting? Is that a body with swords pointing at it? Obviously, this does not prove he is a murderer, but wouldn't Jack notice that? I think Jack not noticing it is important. Jack is not there investigating Hannibal. He has no reason to suspect Hannibal of anything. Even if he had seen the painting, what would he have said? So we will let it slide. Jack calls on Hannibal for a psychological profile and brings him into the office where he name drops Freddie Lowndes. I wonder if that name will be important. In this scene, we also watch Hannibal poke and prod at Will a bit and even seem entertained by him. Will, on the other hand...
Don't psychoanalyze me. You won't like me when I'm psychoanalyzed.
Will.
Now...
Not so much. Hannibal assures Jack that he can help Will find this killer. Next, we find Will and company at a new crime scene, a tableau with a woman mounted on a stag's head. When I showed this show to my friend Harrison, he identified how this show can make murder somehow beautiful but cooking violent. This scene is a great example of that. Hannibal slicing through the woman's lungs and cooking it with a huge dash of fire is so disturbing.
The duck's burned! You're cooking in a burnt pan, you fucking dick! You're gonna blow fire in your face, you fucking donkey!
Not saying the woman's body on the stag head is not disturbing, but it looks almost like art. Even Will says that the killer they are looking for did not paint this picture. But Hannibal killed this girl to point Will in the right direction. In the next scene, it even explains how it was gift-wrapped for him. In Hannibal's own twisted, awful way, he did what he told Jack he would do. He helped Will find the killer. Then we get to see the nightmare stag. I will talk about this image a lot throughout the season, but for right now, I will just say to get used to this stag, he might as well be a part of the main cast. Then Hannibal comes over and feeds Will some human, never eating anything anyone ever cooks for me again. Then they go investigate together. Will gets a suspect in Garrett Jacob Hobbs, but before they can go to the house, Hannibal tips off Hobbs with a phone call. Will arrives at the house for Hobbs, who have already killed his wife. Will bursts into the house and kills Hobbs, but not before Hobbs cuts his daughter's throat. Hannibal steps in to help. Jack gets scolded by Alana for letting Will get too close. Will goes to Hobbs' daughter's hospital room to find Hannibal already there. Both men sit on opposite sides of her bed, both feeling connected to this girl in very different ways. And that is the first episode. Now to unpack it. In this episode, several people poke and prod at Will. The first one is Jack. When Jack arrives in Will's office, he pushes into Will's personal space. Will is clearly uncomfortable with human interaction of almost any kind, and Jack more than knows that. But Jack fixes his glasses and grabs his bag anyway. He is getting in Will's space, knowing that it makes Will uncomfortable, because Jack knows that what he is about to ask of Will is going to make him uncomfortable. It almost seems like Jack's own way of preparing him for what's to come. Then there is Beverly Katz. She is borderline abrasive to him in a sort of flirtatious way. This direct mode of communication is another thing that clearly makes Will uncomfortable. Finally, there is of course Hannibal, who seems to immediately take an interest in Will and pushes him to the point where Will finally snaps. Both Jack and Beverly got away with what they did, but Hannibal's psychoanalyzing is just a bridge too far. If there is one thing Will is clearly uncomfortable with, it is someone trying to look inside of his head. The only person in the episode who cares about Will's emotional state is Alana Bloom. She early on warns Jack about what he is asking of Will. She even states that she would not put him where Jack is. Then Jack assures Alana he will cover him, but not 100%. Jack knows he is putting Will in a dangerous position. This position may harm Will psychologically, but as long as it gets results, then it is okay in his mind. And in the end, Will gets too close. He unloads his gun into Hobbs and is shaken afterward, shaken to the point that he does not return to his classroom. Alana has to step in for him. I do not think that Jack puts Will out there because he does not care about Will. I think he puts Will out there because he cares about catching murderers more. And who can blame him? Will got their man. But at what cost to Will? Even though Hannibal is only in this episode for approximately 20 minutes, he makes a huge impact in that time. Once he meets Will Graham, he cannot help but latch onto him. Hannibal clearly likes Will. He kills for him after all. The tableau in the field is Hannibal's gift to Will, a gift that drives Will directly to Garrett Jacob Hobbs, and sets up another situation for Hannibal to push Will a bit less directly.
Maybe we shouldn't poke him like that, Doctor. Perhaps a less direct approach.
He calls Hobbs and alerts him that they know and are coming. Hannibal brews a situation where he is curious to see what Will do, and Will does not disappoint. He kills Garrett Jacob Hobbs with a hail of gunfire. Throughout this scene, there are several cuts that are very interesting of Hannibal. When the mother falls to the ground and Will is trying to help, Hannibal stands off watching him. Then when Will goes inside, Hannibal looks over Garrett Jacob Hobbs' work. Then he enters the kitchen and sees what Will has done. He almost looks surprised. Not only did Will shoot Hobbs, he shot the hell out of him. Then he looks over at Will struggling to help Hobbs' daughter. You can see him weighing what he should do. Should he let Will struggle and let the girl die? Or would it be more interesting to save the girl to see what happens next? And save the girl Hannibal does. Not to spoil the show going further, but this is something Hannibal does a lot. He does most things he does because he is curious to see what happens. He is a master manipulator. And these skills will crop up more and more as the show goes on. I'm going to do my best to never spoil what is coming down the line. However, this episode is important in the long run in more ways than I can mention now. When I first watched this pilot, I was impressed. In fact, I immediately started watching the next episode. When I watched it, though, I kept trying to predict where the show was going. Was it going to be one of those shows where there was a case of the week and Hannibal would always be meddling in the background on behalf of the killer? Or would it be one of those procedural shows where there is an overarching storyline, but each week the procedural will come first, with the season-long storyline playing out at a snail's pace? Then I watched the second episode, and was surprised to find that this show was a lot smarter than I gave it credit for. We'll find out how that cleverness crops up next time.
I don't find you that interesting.
You will.